Good morning and welcome everyone to this workshop on knowledge exchange and impact. We're going to be talking about knowledge exchange and impact, how you can make what you do in academia matter more. My name's Anne-Marte. This is Michelle. We'll talk a little bit more about ourselves as we go along. You're wearing your masks. If you're comfortable wearing your masks, that's great. We will ask you to chat to each other in this session. So wearing your mask might be a nice thing for those parts. It is being recorded, but we're mostly recording us and the slides. But just so that you are aware that there is a recording. And as far as we're aware, there is no fire alarms or anything like that in the next hour. Mm-hmm. That's everything that we should say. So the plan today is for us to look at what is knowledge exchange and impact. We'll talk about that in terms of a best practice approach. You're not going to learn knowledge exchange and how to do impact in an hour. So we're going to give you some starters, and then obviously, hopefully you'll work on it. We'll focus on a policy audience. That's because for the centres of expertise that we represent, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, we have a policy audience, so it is decision makers in the Scottish Government and in Scottish Government agencies that we work with mostly. But as we'll also see, an audience is an audience. You know, people are people, so a lot of these things will be applicable across the board and not just to policy teams in the Scottish Government. We'll talk about two particular engagement methods or communications methods, the elevator pitch and the policy brief. One is verbal, the other is written. But in terms of what is knowledge exchange and what is engagement, anything. You know, whatever you can dream up, dancing your research, or, you know, the sky's the limit on that one. But we'll look in more detail at those two. So we're going to share our experience. This is something that we're constantly learning about as well, because you never know how to do knowledge exchange. It's an ever-evolving skill, I think it's fair to say. Yep.
Do you want to introduce
Me first. So I'm Anne-Marte Bergseng. I'm Knowledge Exchange Manager for ClimateXChange, which is the Scottish Centre of Expertise connecting climate change research and policy. So we work right across all climate change issues: energy, housing, transport, adaptation to climate change, so flooding and so forth. And we have projects with almost all the teams in the Scottish Government at the moment. My background is from journalism, but in the last 10, 12 years, I've worked in sustainability issues.
I'm Michelle Wilson-Chalmers. I'm at the SEFARI Gateway Research and Communications Manager, one of two. So SEFARI stands for the Scottish Environment, Food and Agricultural Research Institutes. It's a collection of 6 world-leading institutes in their own right, based across Scotland. And the Gateway part is the Knowledge Exchange and Impact Hub. And we also represent the whole portfolio, which involves our partners, the Centres of Expertise, which you'll hear more about in the second session, if you join us again at midday. And I'm also a teaching fellow on the master's course at Edinburgh University in Science, Communication and Public Engagement, and I actually teach the course Science, Policy and Practice. Prior to both of those roles, I was a researcher myself, and I have 15 years in the where I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. Yeah.
So between us, we have quite a bit of experience around this field. Are there any particular questions that you would make sure that we cover today? Is there anything that you're coming to this session with this morning and thinking, this is the one thing that I really want you to talk about? No? we'll give you an opportunity to ask questions as we go along, if there's any expectations that are not met. So, what is knowledge exchange and impact? Well, there's a lot of words going around in this field. Now, communicating your research is one of them. That's the kind of broadcast, sending it out there. Knowledge exchange is very much about, as the word suggests, the phrase suggests, the exchange. So it's between at least two parties, and it's about the input of both of those. It's not just about making the science or the research known. It's about the exchange and the way that that dialogue develops. And one of the reasons that that's become a focus in academia over the last few years is the impact agenda. Some of you may be familiar with the term REF, so the Research Excellence Framework, and the fact that universities can get paid, literally, for good case studies on research impact. But it's also important in funding of research and of universities and research institutions more generally, because if we can show that this matters, this changes things outside of academia. This is not just of interest to our fellow researchers or academics. What we're doing matters to those who decide. So for our work, it matters to those who decide on budgets and on actions in terms of what should Scottish agricultural policy look like? What should transport policy look like? How do we spend the budget in the Scottish Government? And so we're looking to give them the best available evidence to take those decisions. So, before we start in earnest, how do you feel about knowledge exchange? Is it something that you're not too sure about? Stay in your seat. If you're kind of, I have an idea about this, you can raise your hand. And if you think, done it, been there, just here to sort of make sure that I'm topping up my knowledge, you can stand up. 1, 2, 3. Couple of raised hands. Good. Okay, so we've got a fair spread. Thank you. We've got a fair spread. And that's good, because the more chat, discussion we can have about it, we can always learn from each other. Michelle and I were talking about this morning, that for us, we do these courses or these workshops quite regularly, but I certainly feel that I always learn from the audience and I learn from other people, because this is not a set piece at all.
Thank you. So we're going to begin by discussing what are the benefits of doing knowledge exchange. And I really wanted to open this up to you guys. So if you've got any ideas, please feel free to shout them out. If you think from an expert's perspective, what's the benefit of trying to exchange their knowledge? Can anybody think of a reason at all? Yeah? Yeah, that's an excellent one. Certainly, you can get a lot of personal benefit from your research being valued. Society could get a lot of benefit from your research being valued. Yep, that's brilliant. Anybody got any others?
It's justifying funding.
Yes. Yeah, my colleague Anne-Marte has already mentioned that the REF, the Research Excellence Framework, you can get paid for making an impact, for making a difference. So it's definitely quite often a criteria for funding these days. Does anybody have any more? I've got quite a few. Yep.
So I think the other bit that's important is to get a sense of what people's problems are. It's easy to think you know what they are and to prescribe a whole lot of stuff which isn't necessarily what they want. So I think understanding what the problems are and why there are barriers to some of the things that you think ought to be happening is really important.
Yeah, it definitely is, and it definitely fits into that knowledge exchange angle, doesn't it? You can learn from the people that probably your research is intended to benefit, and you can probably adapt your research and improve it even further. So yeah, they're all great ones. I've got a few here. So we've had, you might enjoy communicating it. It's certainly how I moved from research into this kind of field. I enjoyed communicating it. And you want to share that passion you have for that interest in your research. And you might feel it's your duty. Again, that was definitely one I had. You want to improve people's understanding. You want to prompt and inform debate. You might want to change behaviour or make the world better. It's also quite a good opportunity to be creative and innovative and learn new things. Anne-Marte, again, has already mentioned there's lots of ways to communicate, and we'll come on to those later, and that can really give you quite a different creative way to get involved. These days there's a lot of fake news going around, so a lot of scientists feel compelled to dispel myths, for example. We've mentioned personal gain, we've mentioned condition of funding. So these are all great examples of why you'd get involved. But what about from the non-expert's perspective, the person that you're communicating that research to? What kind of benefits could they get from you sharing your knowledge with them? Can anybody think of any examples there? Yeah, brilliant.
They get to know the real outcomes or consequences.
Yeah.
Because musicians, legislators, or any other ideas they have wrote before, but they can know the real issues.
Yeah, you're exactly right. They've got direct access to the real issues, the real research, and the real evidence. Yep, that's a great example. Are there any others? Yep. Improve their knowledge, yeah, definitely. What about lots of people, when they think of knowledge exchange, they think of things as science festivals. Why do you think scientists often get involved in science festivals? What's the benefit maybe for the children that are there? You know, it's yep.
Might inspire them to do a career in science.
Yeah, it could inspire them to follow in your footsteps. Quite often it's fun, it's engaging, it's probably free as well, which is quite good. So there's lots of reasons they could want to get involved. They want to learn, they're interested in the world around them, it directly affects them, they want to make informed decisions, they want accessible and reliable knowledge. Generally, they trust scientists, much more than politicians, for example. It could be fun, it could be engaging, it's often free, quite often it's funded in a direct or indirect way from those people, because they may be taxpayers, their parents may be taxpayers, for example. And it can really add to their own knowledge, and it can give them an opportunity to share that knowledge with you as well. So where do we start? Well, knowledge exchange can be quite daunting when you're first starting out. But, and I hope Anne-Marte would agree, it's definitely fun. It's never boring, and you're always learning something. A top tip, certainly for me, would be that good planning really helps. And what we're going to try and do today is give you a way to think of that planning by breaking it into a series of questions. And those questions are going to be around why, what, who, how, when, these kind of questions. And eventually, did it work? Things will go wrong, undoubtedly. I was at an event on Saturday when we were live streaming to 200 people, and only 35 got in. So things will go wrong. Please don't worry about it. It's just part of life. But it's quite good in your planning to plan what if something goes wrong. How are you going to cope? What are you going to do? So you need to be quite flexible. And good knowledge exchange takes time and effort, but it's definitely rewarding. And finally, definitely build in an evaluation. How are you going to know if what you've done has worked? because it may dictate whether you change it next time, for example.
So, some of you may recognise the policy cycle, as it's known, that little lovely flower there on the side. So that's how policy processes are described in the textbooks. It's not how they happen in real life, because it's a lot messier than that. But this is just an illustration to show you or to talk about the fact that research and evidence and expertise is important to plug in at all these steps. So when we're setting the agenda, when we're looking at how do we formulate and enact policies, what should we do, what should we spend the budget on, when we're implementing it, so does it happen as we planned it was going to that you're following the process, and also in monitoring and evaluation. There's a lot of research involved in looking at, did it have the impact that we thought it was going to have? So evidence is important at all of those stages, and better informed decisions at those stages is really of value to societal value. And going back to the kind of why would you do knowledge exchange? Well, this is public money. Most research is funded by the public purse. So making it available and having it plug into that policy cycle can be seen as a democratic issue. But of course it isn't nice and tidy like that. And I think it's important to think when you're doing knowledge exchange or when you're engaging in a debate as a scientist or as an academic, that there's lots of other voices. There's the media, there's think tanks, there's pressure groups, NGOs, there's politics. What's going on in the minister's constituency at the moment? Maybe that's something that really throws all the evidence out of the window. So being aware of the importance of evidence and of research and being willing to engage in that, but equally appreciating that there's a lot of other voices. And I suppose that goes to the point about, planning your knowledge exchange. So, what do you include? What is it that you're kind of exchanging knowledge about? This on the left there is the inverted pyramid of news. And it's the way that editors in newspapers, back in the day when it was actually hard copy written on typewriters, they would take a pair of scissors. If there wasn't space in the paper, they would literally snip off the end of the news report that the journalist had written. So that's why you need to have the need to know at the top and the nice to know at the bottom. These days, of course, if we think something's on a web page or something's in a podcast, we have a little bit of time to catch the attention of the reader or listener or viewer, and we might lose them. So don't spend a lot of time at the start, at the top of your briefing or at the start of your podcast or your talk, discussing things that are nice to know, but are not need to know. Prioritizing in that way to keep, the key findings, the recommendations, the really juicy bits up the top. And sometimes it can take a bit of time to find out that. I would say the important thing in knowledge exchange is focusing, and as we'll be talking about a little bit, is focusing on the so what. So you've found out whatever it is you've found out, if you studied this phenomenon, what do you know about it? Researchers are very good at saying we need more research. We always need more research, so that goes without saying. Why does what you've found out matter to your audience? And what are the benefits, the solutions, the practical things that you can put out there to make those decisions more informed than what they were without that? And then in academia, there's a lot of focus on methodology. How did you do this? It has to be possible to replicate the experiment or whatever it was. that can go down into the nice to know. People who are interested will, get to it. If it's at the end of your podcast or it's at, the end of your briefing, think of it as a kind of layer that people are moving through. And the ones that only have a minute, they still need to get those key messages up the top.
So if we move from the why, the what, we're now on the who. So certainly the thing you can learn the most if you're doing any form of science communication or knowledge exchange is to really think about who you are trying to do that knowledge exchange, that communication with. Who is your audience? Now, who are they? Where are they? What are they interested in? Particularly, what are they interested in just now? Certainly for a policy audience, that could change, maybe even on a daily basis. So you need to think about your target group. Is it the media? Is it policy? Is it public? Is it experts? Is it business? What would they be interested in? And also, what do you want to do? Do you want to inform them? Do you want to change their behavior? Do you want to learn from them? But when you're thinking about your target group, it actually gets a little bit more complicated than that. Because what you need to remember is that even though you've narrowed it down to a target group, that group is still made of individuals, and that is particularly true in policy. They can have quite a variety of backgrounds, a variety of experiences. So for example, if I was to ask you to, you've all got in common that you're in Glasgow today, you're here for a knowledge exchange seminar, but if I was to ask you what your hobbies are, for example, does anybody watch sport or is involved in sport? Put your hand up if you are. Yeah. Does anybody listen to music? Yeah. Does anybody collect things? Yeah. You can see that you're all different. You all have different values, different beliefs, different interests. So it's quite a good practice to sort of layer your interaction to that target group and then be willing to talk to your audience and get to know their interests a little bit closer. Okay?
So the reason all of that matters is because when you start thinking about how am I going to do this, how am I going to make my research count, then one of the most important things that you can do so if we're talking about a policy and a decision maker type audience, is to build relationships. We're humans. The better we know each other, the more we trust each other, more we know about, you were really good last time. Last time I asked you a question, you helped me. You didn't have the answer, but you went and found some information and we discussed it and it was really helpful. So I'll come to you again next time I want to know about something. That's just human nature. That's just who we are. We wouldn't just, we would stop a stranger in the street to ask for directions, but not much else. That's kind of the extent of talking to people that we don't have any relationship with. So that's really important. The other thing, as we've said, it's knowing your audience. Start with where they are. So, for example, at the moment, you could say we've got COP going on. So there's a heightened interest in climate change issues. So how can we use that then to get out messages about our research on what's the most efficient type of bus that you can have from a climate change perspective? So hooking that onto something that's happening in your audience's life, whether that's their professional life or sort of in general, is really good. And for policy, it's always, what is it that the minister has asked them to do? So ministers will ask their policy teams to develop a policy on a certain issue, to tackle fuel poverty, for example. So people who pay a disproportionate amount of their income on heating their homes. How do we tackle that? What's the best solution? And then the policy teams will have to go away and find out that. So if that's on their agenda, What's the research that we can offer them? It's really important in this exchange to have the starting point, that is, how can I help? How can I give you something that it's going to be beneficial for you? Rather than, I want you to sit down because I have something I want to say. It's really a good starting point to tell people that, you better sit down and listen to me. But if I'm interested in you as an audience, and I want to know what's going on, how can I help? That's a much more positive starting point. So we've talked about, what's out there, and then the most important thing, I think, in the how is leave behind what you've learned about how to write academic texts. Talk to people in plain language. We will go through it in a minute, a bit more. Think about different ways of communicating things. So how can you use visuals? How can you use different ways of putting the same bit of information across? And these days, there's so much software and whatnot that, it's much easier to do those sort of things now than it used to be, shall we say. That's yours.
Okay, so if we focus a bit more on the how, there's lots and lots of ways to communicate. You could have a presentation like we're having, you could run focus groups, you could have what's called citizens' juries, where you bring in citizens from outside and you hear their voices. You could run science art projects, you could engage with people via social media, for example. So there's lots and lots of ways to communicate. And in 1 hour, sadly, we can't really touch upon all of them. But what we decided to do was to focus on the 2 most common communication methods for a policy audience. And those are face-to-face. And I'm not sure, like this guy here, probably talking to the mirror helps, although it might help for the exercise we've got a little bit later.
He's practicing.
He's practicing. And then the other form of engagement we're going to use is a written form. And what we'd like to say here is written isn't really a classic form of knowledge exchange because it's going back to that dissemination. You're putting out that material and it's not immediately obvious how you're going to get that exchange of knowledge. But certainly in a policy context, that's quite commonly how you start that interaction with a policy colleague. And it will often result in a conversation. So, you might find yourself then talking to them, you might find yourself going in and giving evidence in Parliament in front of a committee, for example. So we think it's quite a useful method to help you get started with in this session. So I'm going to take face-to-face events and Anne-Marte is going to take written. So face-to-face, we're thinking of things like events, presentations. With our organisations, we run lots of events where we get out talking to people, and we've certainly been doing that during the COP26. Now, it's really effective, although because of the recent and ongoing pandemic, it's a little bit more tricky than it used to be, although I will say online tools are becoming really useful as a way of coping with not being able to meet in person. But if you are able to meet in person, it's really good to go to them if you can. Don't be afraid to do that. Take your opportunities when you can. You probably find all colleagues that you'll meet if you're in other sessions today will often say there's a lot of discussion at that coffee break afterwards. And I think lots of discussions happen there that maybe wouldn't happen in person. By communicating face-to-face, you can easily avoid any misunderstandings. So if there are immediate questions, you're there to help and to address them. We've all had emails where you can misinterpret it, for example. It's quite good to demonstrate something. Certainly policymakers get bombarded with a lot of information, like a lot of us these days, I think. But if you bring the topic to life, that's really quite good and engaging for them. So you're using quite active language. What are you doing? What's going to happen next? These kinds of things. And provide options to find out more. We have things like QR codes to extra information. In the olden days, before we'd have leaflets, things like that, to extra information. You might have business cards so they can contact you after the event, for example. One thing policymakers in particular don't particularly like to hear is we don't really know because we'd still need more research. It's fine to say you don't know and you're still investigating it. You never should be forced into saying something that isn't accurate. But just bear in mind that, you know, if they get a wall, ultimately they have to make a decision. And if they get a wall of people saying, we don't know anything, there will be aspects you do know for certain that you can share with them, even if you can't share your final outcome because you maybe haven't got it yet. And don't offer to send research papers. I think my colleague Anne-Marte has already alluded to this. It will come on to writing in a minute, and she will in detail explain the difference between research papers and policy briefs. So I'll maybe leave that for a bit later. So in the face-to-face, a really good technique, which we're going to try and help you learn, is the elevator pitch. Now, has anybody heard of the elevator pitch before? No, a few nods, a few shaking of the heads. Okay. So the elevator pitch is essentially, you've got the time it takes for you to ride in that elevator between a couple of floors to try and explain your research. Now, as an ex-researcher myself, when I was first told that, I thought, oh, crikey, how am I going to do that? That's really hard. But if you can practice it and develop it for different audiences, it will come in really useful. And it won't just be useful for your work. I certainly have relatives that still don't understand what my research was. So it'll come in useful with your family, it'll come in useful with your friends, it'll even come in useful at interviews. So it's a technique I'd really advocate. And what a really good elevator pitch does is it helps transfer that interest and that enthusiasm for your research to the other person. Okay? And definitely tailor it for different audiences. So for example, how you deliver an elevator pitch to your grandma would be totally different to a policymaker or Nicola Sturgeon, for example. Okay, so I'm going to try and give you the little bits of the basics of a structure here, and hopefully you're all going to be willing to have a go at it. So first of all, of course, you might have to introduce yourself. It may not be essential, it depends on the circumstances, but it's always nice to say hello and who you are. If you had one line, how would you explain your research? So normally what I do is I do a role play with a colleague about this, and they ask me what my PhD research was. And I start off by saying it involved a 5-endotrig radical cyclization that was disfavored. And my friend goes, what? Because who on earth knows what that is? And they persevere until eventually I get down to, I was trying to make new drugs to treat Alzheimer's, which is much easier to grapple with, and it's much easier to understand the importance of the issue. Okay? So you reel them in. Why is it important that you do that? You know, I used to know facts of how many people get Alzheimer's each year, how many people it affects, for example. It might be that you're developing a new invention that's going to save, and this is particularly useful if you're talking to a policy audience, you know, it could save thousands if that technology comes in. What are you doing? So, you know, I could get from I'm looking at developing new drugs to treat Alzheimer's, down to involves a new type of chemistry methodology, a new way of trying to make them, for example. And it's currently, you know, a very disfavored way to do it, but it gives access to really diverse types of drugs that have never been made before, for example. What have you found out? I found out the method worked. I could do it. I could make drugs that way. Sadly, none of them were active enough in my case. And why does it matter in the real world? Well, we've probably all got some relative that suffered with Alzheimer's. It would be quite easy for your audience to be able to understand and appreciate that. And remember your audience. You know, again, what you tell your grandma will be different to a policy maker. So we think the best way to get familiar with this is to have a go yourself. So what we're going to do, if you're all willing, is you can talk to the person. We're going to give you 5 minutes, because a good elevator pitch is only normally about 2 minutes or so. But we're going to give you 5 minutes, because some of you may not have had a go before. Just have a chat to the person next to them. Try and explain what it is you do for a living. And see, you'll find you can pretend there's somebody if you like. You could pretend they're Nicola Sturgeon. You could pretend Barack Obama was here yesterday. You know, you could pretend whoever you would like them to be, and just have a go at practicing. And even, you know, today we still practice this. It's a really good thing to keep practicing. So it's your chance. What is it you would want to say if you had just 2 minutes with Nicola Sturgeon, Barack Obama, or whoever? So we'll give you 5 minutes. Talk to the person next to you. If you don't want to get too close, or talk to the person next to you. And I appreciate there's an odd number, so if you want to go in a 3, that's fine. Just have a little think to yourself for 5 minutes on what you do, okay?
Okay.
Right, that was about 5 minutes. I know it goes quite quickly, but I just wondered, does anybody want to share? I mean, it may be, how easy did you find that? Or did you find out something interesting from somebody else, for example? Does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Was it easy then? Nobody found it difficult at all? I find it difficult. We tried there and still find it difficult. No? Yeah?
Really difficult.
You found?
I stood up at the beginning thinking that I knew much about this. But I was trying to talk about what it is I do. What I try to do is synthesize lots of disparate things. It's really hard to say, actually, why is that important? And what's being missed by you not doing it, Dom? Actually, nothing.
Yeah.
So you know, actually, so I think it's really challenging. I found it really difficult to sort of get to the point where I felt like a real J&A.
Yeah.
I haven't taken the leap yet.
I could definitely hear you were trying, Dom, so I was quite impressed. I'm really grateful for your honesty in that, you know, Dom's a professor in his own right. He's in the second panel. He's very experienced at knowledge exchange. So to hear he still finds it difficult is, for me, quite encouraging, as well as hopefully for you guys. It's not an easy thing to do, and you know, to tailor it for different audiences, it can be quite difficult as well. But I hope it's a technique you will find useful going forwards. Okay? So I think it's writing, isn't it? Next?
Yeah, and I think just to finish off on this point, that this is very, I think what I usually say to the academics that I work with is think about it as going to the gym. You know, this is your communications exercise. So we need to keep our muscles exercised, you know, to stay healthy. And it's the same with this. You can't learn to communicate well or learn to do your elevator pitch or do knowledge exchange once and then that's it. You're just reeling it out. It's not like riding a bike. Though I don't know if you can forget that as well. But think about it in that way. Okay, so if we then go to the writing part, I find certainly in my job, and I think in speaking for the others here as well, that when we work with the Scottish Government, they very often want the answers written down, because that means that they can be available. There can be a library, a database of these answers that policy teams can go to. So we're increasing that knowledge base all the time. So putting something in writing can be really important. Even passive form of communication at the start, but you can build on it, you can use it as part of a longer process. So the traditional written output from research is a research article. And this is just one way of describing what that is, but it's all about the kind of, the analytical framework, the hypotheses, the research design, you discuss your findings, but it's not necessarily the most important, a lot of this is about the academic interest in working on the problem. Sentences are generally very long, and if you look at the length of words, so the longer a word is, the harder it is to read. And if you look at traditional research papers, words of 3 or more syllables are quite common. That makes it hard for most people to read. In contrast to that, a policy brief or a summary that is not for academics, we can call it. In our world, it's called a policy brief, but we could just as well call it a summary for non-experts. Focuses on the options. So it focuses on the so what. What are we going to do? Why does this matter? Again, it's that impact. How could we change something in the world as the basis for this? And we don't need to set out all the methodology, all the ins and outs of the experiment that we did. We trust that that's there, and we'll ask you for it if we want to know. So that doesn't need to be in a policy brief. So the thing to think about is, you're talking to somebody who's not an expert. So if you're using, use everyday words, try to read it out to yourself. Very often we'll hear, if we read something out loud, that's a bit difficult. That's not really quite how we would say it. Well, write it how you would say it. That's much easier. Structure, you want to think back to that inverted pyramid of news. What's your headline? What's the thing that you've found? What's the recommendations, the main findings, the main recommendations? Again, the so what. And then bring it down into the detail as you go along. And also, just a tip, and I'm sure you've got this, but remember, if you're putting something in writing out there, add some contact details. Think about what it looks like. Is it appealing to pick up and have a look at? Can you easily scan the bit of text? So if you think about an abstract in a research paper, it's usually a block of text. It can be quite difficult to scan it and quickly get an idea. But if you put that into some bullet points, or highlighting certain words that you want the reader to focus on, then it's much easier for the reader to kind of map out, what is this text about? Should I read it? Should I spend my time on it? And keep it short. If you have your contact details on there and they're interested, they'll contact you. So, how do you write short? I'd recommend having a look at a lot of resources on the Plain English campaign's website. They have various different tests and resources you can use to clean your language, make it simpler, speak plainly. But the main things to remember is keep it short. Use full stops. If you find yourself writing a sentence that is more than I'm saying here 15 to 20 words, the record in ClimateXChange is 93 words in a sentence. I kid you not. It is impossible for anybody to follow the logic through 93 words without taking a break. And that's what a full stop is. So use them. Use active verbs. So the example here, the traditional academic way, dare I say slightly British, way of saying things is the sentence in red there. A review of the plan will be undertaken by government next year. It's a passive sentence. We step away from taking any action. The active way of saying that, the one above, government will review the plan next year. It makes it shorter, automatically makes it shorter, and it tells you what's going to happen. Who's going to do what when? That's what we need to know. If every single sentence in what you're writing is passive, and you're adding on 3, 4, 5 words in every sentence because of the construction, your text is going to be very long and it is going to be hard to read. So this is quite important to not lose your readers. Because we are engaging in a policy process, we want people to do something. Being personal can be quite important. You know, we're there as people. We recognize that there are people on the other side of the table that have to do something. They have part of their job. So involving us as people in the process, it makes things come to life. Language, terms, I have struggled a bit with some of my researchers, sounds like I own them, some of the researchers that I work with. Just a word like, there's a positive trend in this data. To a lot of people that sounds really good. A-okay. Whereas in some academic settings you'll say, no, that just means that it's going up. But it could be a negative thing that's going up, a bad thing that's increasing. So thinking about words like that, what do we mean when we say we have a theory about something? Is it just a hunch? Do we just think that that might be the case? If we can change that to words that are more used in the common, the everyday language. And also, check your spelling. Don't trust Word if you're writing on a computer, because it's not always right. Plain English Campaign is a great resource there. So, when to do all of this?
Yeah, when is also important. For example, is there an optimum time of day? Certainly for things like social media, you might think of when's the time that people are going to be looking at that social media. Is there a particular week, year that you want to communicate? You know, if you're doing climate change research, these couple of weeks is probably a fantastic time to be communicating. Or would it have been better to have done it before, because it might get lost in everything that's going on at the moment? These are the kinds of things to think about. Quite often there's lots of world days, national days, certainly for social media. Again, it's a great way to tag on to something that's going on to get it more noticed. Certainly if you're writing something for the press, that's another good way. You know, there's certainly been lots of things, for example, on the BBC and newspapers about climate change. It is everywhere. Obviously there's COP at the moment, but there's things like World Antibiotics Week, World Diabetes Day, there's a day of education, even things like World Pulses Day or World Water Day. They're all things we as organisations will look out for to try and increase how that research gets out to people. And also, is there and I think Anne-Marte touched on this earlier, is there a particular point in your research when it's good to communicate? A lot of researchers think they have to wait right until the end, until their research is complete, in order to talk about it. That's not the case. Quite often, certainly policy would appreciate knowing what research is coming. What do you think are the things that are going to be really important in the future that they should be looking at, for example? So when is definitely a good question to think about.
And then, one of the most important things of all is your after-action review. Did it work? Did what you thought was going to happen actually happen? Did it work the way that you'd planned it was going to work? And did the audience react in the way that you thought they would react? It's the step that is usually missed out, because once we've done something, so once we've done this event today, we'll just go, whew, Hank, that's over, you know, let's hit the pub. But taking the time to learn from what you've done is so important, because that's how you make it better, quicker next time. So it's taking that time to reflect, and reflecting on the things that worked. How do we do more of the stuff that worked? And learning from the things that didn't work. So, you know, how can we change something, or was there actually something good that came out of something going wrong? If you see what I mean. Sometimes, you know, unexpected things happen, but actually it's good. I prefer to do this with somebody. So again, it's that exchange, it's reflecting on what's happened, but you can also do it just yourself, you know, just writing down what was supposed to happen, what did I learn, those kind of things. So, in summary.
Yeah, so in summary, we've tried to give you sort of a framework of questions to think about when you embark on any knowledge exchange type activity. But don't always think of those questions independently. Sometimes you need to mix and match those questions. So it could be, for example, when is your particular audience, your who, going to be interested in the knowledge exchange you want to do? So think about things like why you share your research, who you're trying to communicate with, what does your audience need to know, but also what do they already know? What type of method would be appropriate? And we've only touched on a couple today, but there are plenty more, and we're happy to stay and talk about those if you'd like. When's the best time to communicate? Also, where is one we haven't really touched upon, but that could also be important for your audience. And also, was there an impact? It might be that by doing that knowledge exchange, you've helped that researcher achieve some impact. It might be that it's had an impact on whoever you've had that knowledge exchange experience with, for example. And as Anne-Marte has just said, take a bit of time to reflect, and I too prefer doing it with somebody else rather than on my own, because quite often other people notice things that we may not notice. So we've got colleagues here today that I'm sure will give us feedback afterwards, for example.
So, should we go back to our little exercise and see how confident do you feel now? As we've said, this is not like you have now learned knowledge exchange and impact and you can just go out and do it. But we're hoping that you feel a little bit more confident about it now. So those who feel absolutely still not confident at all, stay seated. Those who think, yeah, I'll have a go at that. It's getting clearer in my mind what I need to do, hands up. And those who think, yeah, I know how I can plan and do some knowledge exchange going forward, stand up. Oh, I'm liking it. I'm liking it. Thank you. So that's all we had to say for today. Hopefully that's been useful for you. It's something that, you know, well, I certainly think it's not going to go away. The whole, you know, knowledge exchange and impact agenda is not going to go away. And part of that is because budgets are tight and we have to show that what we're doing has value. That's our contact details. We love to chat about this, don't we? As you can tell.
The next event is not till midday. There's a panel event with all the Scotland's Centres of Expertise, which you're welcome to come in and join if you'd like, and they'll share some more specific examples of when knowledge exchange has worked or not. And then this afternoon there's also a session on vectors and animal, plant and human disease, I think, which should be quite interesting. If anybody's interested in that, that's at 3 o'clock. But we're more than happy to stick around, answer any questions. If anybody would like copies of the slides, just email me at info@sefari.scot, and I'm happy to share them. Hopefully you are as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, and thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.